Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And it's taken me quite some time to come to the mic to tell it, but I knew it was an important one to tell. So here I am to share his story and mine with you. And it's important that I tell the story of the surviving sibling, the forgotten mourner, the story that is not told enough. So thank you for coming with me on this journey, and thank you for listening to my story. Now all I could do was wait. I was a prisoner to WhatsApp. I was a prisoner to my only connection to my family, at least in the living world, my father. And I was kind of a prisoner to this message of, we're leaving, we'll be back, is really what the message had said. And as I laid on the couch and drank water and sometimes some wine, and just The Office played over and over again, and I would pull myself up off the couch from time to time to take care of my little dog Scarlett. Luckily she was so tiny and 5 pounds and potty trained on her pads, so I didn't always have to go outside, and because it was a challenge to even get off that couch. Just making sure that she was fed and taken care of. I'm grateful for that accountability and that I had to do that, because I didn't really care about taking care of myself at all. I was also very grateful for the guy that I was dating at the time, and he was really a workaholic, so it wasn't like he was around all the time, but I'm always grateful for people that care, and he did. But I was really alone. It was just a lonely experience, and I'm also very grateful for my friend Walter, who was there for me during that time too, because it was sad, but that it ended up being day after day that went by with nothing. I heard nothing. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know where they had gone. I didn't know anything. And I didn't know when they would return. And the level of anxiety and fear that I was going through was just something, again, I just don't know how to describe to someone that hasn't gone through it. And I will try my best on this podcast. That's why I'm bearing it all and sharing it all. But I had struggled with anxiety in the past in my life, and this brought it to an entirely different level. I remember speaking to my doctors during this time because I was really worried about myself. It was a very scary time for myself, and I remember changing. They put me on a stronger antidepressant. They put me on Lexapro, which I had tried many, many years before when I first dealt with anxiety. And I didn't like it because you can't really feel much on it. But I understood what they were saying, and I thought, that's probably what I do need right now. I probably don't need to be feeling so low, or let's see how it works, because your body can change and evolve. And so I remember taking that, and I had anxiety medication. It was a lot of anxiety medication because I wasn't responding to it. And I still wasn't responding to it, but at least it kept me calm enough where I felt like I was going to go insane, because all I wanted was to be able to say kind of some words of peace to my brother, about my brother. I wanted to see his girlfriend and her family and thank them for being so amazing. It was just this complete loss of control. And I remember feeling so just brokenhearted about the situation. How could I be surrounded by all these people? And I felt pretty alone then, but this was even more lonely. And I felt so confused about several things. One, I didn't understand how this story got so convoluted or what even happened. And I didn't even have a chance to tell my side, really the truth, or I didn't even know what had been said at the time. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. I just knew that my mother was upset and had made accusations. I didn't even understand what was going on. I was so brokenhearted that my father would even entertain that. I mean, this is a woman that he had divorced. I mean, it was a mutual divorce from what I understand, but again, that's their stuff. I spent, almost 30 years of my life being involved in their stuff, and I'm very grateful to sit here today at 35 and not be involved in their stuff. And that's something I think, as a sidebar, I'd give advice to anybody that goes through their parents' divorce. It's really hard not to take a side, or it's really hard not to do that. And it was challenging, and it was it was nice to not feel that and then all of a sudden be thrown back into that. It was devastating, but it's nice to sit here today telling the story and not be in the middle of that. But it was like a torture chamber. And I finally, kind of started to release the control because I didn't have any. And I kind of gave it to God, I guess is the best way to put it. The universe, whatever you believe in, a higher power, and said, I don't have control over this. I have no control. And I prayed and I asked a whole lot, and this still makes me emotional to this day. It was a very, very tough time, and I've never really talked about this time. I think this is why this makes me so emotional, because I have been abandoned in different ways throughout my life and in different relationships and also through my family, and I've never felt full support. And so it was very triggering for me, and looking back on it now and talking through it again, it's triggering again because this isn't really the part of the story that comes up a whole lot, like, what did you do for this, week? What happened between the 21st when he was declared legally dead and we had to leave the room, and December 3rd when we had his ceremony? Well, I was alone. This is what happened. And this part, I think, is really difficult for me to share because of that. Nobody really knows about this except for, my closest, Walter, my friend, who a lot of you guys will know if you listen to my other podcast, who lived it with me. My closest friend, Sloan, who lived it with me, who had a lot of loss in her life. And of course, my husband. But there's not really anybody else that knows about this time. And this time was, I think, the part that I'm still working through a little bit because it was so difficult. It's difficult. And I have a lot of empathy for people that go through an isolating experience, and also an experience where you're not able to tell your side, and you're also not able to speak the truth, and you're also watching people manipulate and say things that are not true to get what they want. And I just had to lay there and wait. And I realize now that was a lesson for me, because my brother was notoriously impatient, and I am not the most patient person either, but he definitely takes the cake. And he would tell you that if he was here today. He's someone that, like, if you were going somewhere, he would literally, like, if you weren't ready, he'd just, like, leave you. And he'd be like, I'll see you there or not, whatever. But I'm not a patient person either, and I definitely think that experience was teaching me patience and letting go and trust, and just knowing that the good always rises to the top and the truth always comes out. And I remember during that time fading in and out of whatever you could call sleep, some sort of concoction of that. And I just remembered a lot of memories during that time. And this was a time of reflection. And I think it's really important to talk about a lot of the things I remembered. I remembered a lot of the memories that my brother and I had as children. And that was just, it was all like flashing before me and coming into my dreams, and also coming into just me laying there and remembering all the good times we had together. And I remembered in the dark moments, I started to go to some of the dark places. And I think what's challenging for my family, or certain people in my family, is that they think that I'm glorifying my brother in some ways, or glorifying the relationship, or glorifying everything, and ignoring, certain aspects of his life and life decisions. And I feel such a relief even just saying that, because no one deserves to be killed the way my brother was. And, a homicide is a homicide. I'll definitely continue the story about, and my journey to figuring out what happened. But no one deserves to be shot the way he was. He was not this, horrible person. But, did he have some issues with drugs? Yes. And I think the reason my family wanted to keep a lot of this private is because they didn't want that to be known. And did he have some issues with drinking? Did he have some issues with being irresponsible? Yes, he did. He absolutely did. And I think it's really important that people understand that I'm not, trying to say that he was this perfect person that didn't make any mistakes. He had been arrested in his life. He had done things, that weren't, we all make a lot of mistakes. And he had a lot of struggles, and he had a lot of inner demons that he was battling. And I knew that. It had really challenged my relationship with him. And so laying alone there for a week by myself in pain, I thought about the highs and the lows. And of course, I was beating myself up about the fact that I was at dinner the night before he was shot, knowing I needed to call him, knowing I wanted to be with him. I will never forget that moment. I will never forget looking across the table from the man I was seeing and saying that to him. And I just knew. And little did I know that I knew a lot more than I realized. And we were just always connected in that way. And I remembered I had to kind of push that away, because I couldn't live with that guilt at the time, because it wouldn't have changed anything. And I remember Walter and my friend and both the man that I was seeing telling me that, even if you had spoken to him, what would that have changed? It wouldn't have changed anything. That's what really, trust me, it took me years. It's taken me probably 4 to 5 years to get to that mindset, because I thought for some reason if I spoke to him or something like that, what would it have changed? He was on this set with these guys that were not good guys. One of the wonderful traits of my brother was that he was a very trusting person, and he really saw the good in everyone for the most part. And that was also a really bad quality in my opinion with him, because he would trust people that, I would meet them and instantly not get a good feeling from them. He was just an eternal optimist, almost sometimes to the point where it was so unrealistic. And again, you can see where that would be a good quality in someone, where they see the good in people, but he would take it to the extreme, and it would put him in these kinds of circumstances. Again, is this his fault? Not at all. Not at all. It's not. It's not someone's fault when they are killed in this kind of manner. But I think it's really important that I'm open and raw and share with you that, he was human, and he made mistakes, and he was not hanging out with the right people. And just because you make mistakes and you're not around the right crowd or the right people doesn't mean that you deserve this. And I remember thinking that a lot, and I kind of got on a hamster wheel a lot about, I should have called, I should have said this, I should have. And I will jump forward for a second to something that my therapist had told me, and he told me back in time when I was going to therapy about family issues and relationships in the past, and then we spoke about it again when I went to speak about this when I was ready to, a couple months later, and he said, be careful with the word should. Be really careful with the word should. And that really resonated with me, because the word should is a very dangerous word, in my opinion. That's how I translated what he said, because, coulda, shoulda, woulda, kind of, that's where that phrase comes from, I think. But, should is putting an expectation on something that we don't even know what the outcome would have been. So that kind of helped begin the healing process of if I should have called him, if I would have called him. And I think that's something we struggle with. I think that as surviving siblings, we struggle with those things. And so that, I remembered that from our past sessions, and I remembered that's always stuck out with me throughout the years. And I was able to start thinking about, okay, well, let me focus on the last couple times I'd seen my brother. And there were some really good memories, and there were some really bad ones. There were some where he was really battling his mental health issues, and he was not doing well. My mother had picked him up, and he didn't have anything. He had sold everything. And that had happened just a few short years before. I saw my brother when my father had been in town, and my youngest sister was looking at colleges. And, he showed up at the hotel a couple hours late for our dinner. And that was not a pleasant, interaction that we had, because he was not doing well. He was not doing well, but he wanted to present the image that he was. And so I was going into some of those dark places, and I thought to myself, let's go to the light. And that was kind of, a couple days into this, because going to the dark places was not allowing me to remember him in the way that I wanted to. And also, that's not who the person is at the core. That's the person who is struggling and in pain. And so I started to remember, something that was a long time ago, but I remember looking at my dog, Scarlet, and that allowed me to trigger positive memories. And that was him and I going to get her. And then I remembered our dance parties at the holidays. And then I remembered him coming to my apartment and coming out with me to the bar and going on a couple different things together. And I knew he wasn't doing well a couple times because he would just randomly show up at my loft that I had and then my condo, and I was worried about him. I was really worried about him, but I think that was kind of the beginning of me learning to let go, but I always was worried. But I had to kind of create boundaries because of what was going on. And I remember when I was remembering those memories, feeling the guilt that I felt at that time. And I also remember feeling a lot of anger towards my parents because I know that he needed help. But none of that could be changed now. And the best thing that I could do was just think about the positive. And so watching The Office just nonstop really helped a lot, because my brother was so like a Michael Scott. He really was. And I remember on some holidays we would pick out our favorite Office episodes and play them. And we'd drink like whatever we wanted at the time. But my brother loved champagne. And I'm almost saying like in present tense because I still feel like he's here with me. And now I will have like a glass of champagne for him, but I'll talk about that in the future. But that was my coping, was watching those episodes and just waiting. That's all I could do. And I think I finally showered at one point. I don't know, something happened, but life was moving forward and I was not. I was kind of just there. And I remember I got a message. I think it was like December 1st or something like that, maybe the end of November, I don't know, one of those days. And it was from my father on WhatsApp. And it was like waiting for a message that like, I don't know. I don't know. I can't even compare it. I don't know. But those of you who have lost a sibling know it's like a message that like you need more than anything else. Like, so I get this message from my father saying, we're coming back. We'll be back. I'll call you basically. And I'm just like, my heart like stops and then like speeds up with anxiety. And I'm like, what does that mean? Where have they been? It was really intense, and then I text my mother and I ended up speaking with her on the phone finally. And it was really devastating. It was really devastating what I begun to find out. And it would get worse. It would get worse. On their way back, I end up speaking with my mother as they're on their way back. And remember, at this time, I think it is my mom and my dad, and they've gone to like see my sisters or something. Like, that's kind of all I know. And their significant others, which are their husbands. And while that was hurtful, like I was abandoned, like, they're seeing their kids, you know, it was just like, it was hard and it was wrong, but I also understand that they're their children, but I didn't do anything to be abandoned. It was just confusing. And so when my mother contacts me, I guess when my father tells her to or something, I'm not really sure what went on behind the scenes there. This is my recounting my story and my brother's story. My mother tells me that they're going to the Wyndham in Peachtree City. We grew up in Peachtree City, Georgia. Like our kind of like adult childhood life and, you know, high school years and stuff. And so that's where they've decided they want to spread his ashes and do this ceremony. And I said, okay. And she said that, you know, my father had booked a room for me there, and, you know, I could bring Scarlett. You know, he booked a dog-friendly room, and, you know, she wanted me to come down and to be there and to be a part of everything. And that the following day, so this must have been the December 1st, because the 3rd was the quote-unquote ceremony. And then on the 2nd, she wanted me to drive her around, essentially, and get her so she could get her hair done. We would also pick up my brother's ashes, and we were going to put his ashes, you know, at this creek where he had shot a lot of music videos, and, you know, anyone who wanted his ashes could have them. And so, you know, we would purchase urns and things like that. And I knew my dad would want ashes, and so it was a very weird call, and it was a very weird request. And she had asked that I meet her and, like, pick her up from the nail salon in Peachtree City, and then we would stop by Publix, and then we would go to the Wyndham. So I'm like, whatever it takes, I'm gonna do this. Like, at least she's spoken to me on the phone. Like, I'm gonna do it. Okay, whatever. She tells me the family is coming in, like my sisters, their husbands, like staying at the Wyndham. I tell my best friend in the whole world, Caleb, and his father, what's going on. Caleb lost his brother in 2009, and he, of course, is like, of course, we're going to be there. We're going to come down, and they're going to come for the one night, so, you know, for the ceremony. And so they would be there later. And so I tell them to book a room and where I would be and what was going to happen. And the backstory there is really interesting. It's a really eerie story. Caleb had become the older sibling I never had in college. And my first story I ever wrote, and kind of, I think, where I found my voice really as a writer, and maybe even a podcaster before I knew it, was writing the story about him in Afghanistan and losing basically his partner and, you know, in his platoon and all of that. Anyway, you can read the story. It's Garrison 2.0. I won first place for it, 21-22, and it's published. But we were very close, and my brother Andreas was close with him as well. And when his older brother, Caleb's older brother, Josh, passed, Josh and I had a friendship, to clarify, but we were both writers, and we would exchange poetry. We connected on that level. And my brother, this was another really important memory that makes me very emotional too. My brother came with me without even a blink of the eye to the funeral and said, "I'm coming with you." And he came with me. We shared a room with two of my girlfriends. They were sisters, and we stayed up kind of all night talking about them because we went to the wake and then the next day. And I remember my brother just held my hand through the whole funeral, and he was emotional, I was emotional, and I will never forget this for the rest of my life. As everything was going on and Caleb was speaking, I turned and whispered in my brother's ear. I just felt so overcome by this, and I said, "I feel so sad right now. This is so intense. If this was you, I would die. I don't think I could go on. I love you so much. And I remember him turning down to me because he was like 6 foot plus. And I'm like 5'3". And he like turned down to me in my ear and he said, "Don't worry, that will never happen to me. I love you too." And Caleb knew about that moment because I told him about it when my brother did die. And it was eerie to me. And I thought to myself, oh my God, wow. And so Caleb really got it. He was the person that really, really got it and still gets it to this day. And I definitely understand why we are in each other's lives. And I feel very lucky. So he was going to be there. But I had a night to spend before that happened. So maybe this was the second and then we're going into the third. Yeah, maybe it was. It's hard to keep track of these dates. I'm sure you guys know. You always remember when they passed, or when, they were first ill, or in my case, when he was shot, and then, when they were declared dead or they passed. You don't forget the death date. You don't forget that, or when the ceremony was, but these dates leading up, sometimes you're just in such a different state of mind. It can be challenging, and I know as surviving siblings, you guys can empathize with this. It's really wild. So yeah, I guess it must have been the second, and then we stayed the night on the third as well. But anyway, regardless, I don't know, maybe not, because I remember driving my mom around to get everything ready. So yeah, I'm there. I get there late. I believe it was December 1st, and my mother's getting her nails done at the old nail salon she used to go to in Peachtree City, and she wants me to pick her up, and it's right by this Publix there. Why I'm picking her up from getting her nails done, I'm still unclear, because both of my sisters had cars, but I kind of knew that was weird at the time. I kind of knew that was a little off, but again, I was so just wanting to be there, and I wanted to be a part of, I don't know, what I, so amateurly thought was closure or something, right? And so I picked her up. She got into the car and acted like nothing was wrong. Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm freaking great, Mom. I've been, I didn't say this, but, I'm great. I've been abandoned. I've been alone on a couch. Haven't eaten, really had a decent sleep or anything in, I don't know, weeks now. And I'm great. How are you? It was just so bizarre. And so she was telling me how, she's got nails done, getting her hair done the next day at the salon that, I go to here in Buckhead. It was just booked with my hairdresser. It was just so weird. Still to this day, I can't process that. But I think we all process grief differently. So I think I have more empathy towards it, but it was still bizarre. And she says, well, do you need anything, for your hotel room? I said, well, yeah. I said, I'd like to get some water. I definitely want to get some wine, some things like that, and she needed some things too. And so she ends up saying, okay. And so I say, can you sit in the car with Scarlett? Because obviously I had my baby with me. And I went into Publix. So I'm shopping and I have this weird feeling in my stomach. I really do. And I come back out and laid across, I had this cute little white Mercedes at the time that I worked so hard for. I worked so hard for everything in my life, and I'm so grateful that I did. And I walked out and my steering wheel was covered, and I opened the door and it was this shirt to the Edgar Allan Poe restaurant that I really love off Sullivan's Island, near Charleston and that area. And she bought me this shirt. And I just remember getting in the car going, what is this? And she's like, oh, I bought you a shirt while we were on our trip. And she goes, I need to tell you something. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell? You bought me a shirt to tell me what? What is about to happen? Once again, that intuition, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to when you're going through this, and just in general, when you've gone through a loss like this, your intuition just increases to a level that is unmatched. And I remember it was, again, movie-like. I swear this is where, movies are born from, are these stories that we all have from loss and these almost unbelievable situations. I remember almost turning my head at her, slowly, and just going, what the hell in my head? And she starts telling me, she says, look, she goes, your father and I went to go visit, your sisters down there, but George never actually left. And I looked at her again with that slow look of disgust. And I said, what the hell do you mean? And she said, well, he never actually left when you threw him out. And I completely lost it. And I said, what do you mean? I didn't throw him out. He was throwing things at you. He was being horrible and abusive towards you. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, she wouldn't even address that. She wouldn't even acknowledge it because it's the truth. And she continues on to say that basically everything starts to come together. And he scurried around that night before Thanksgiving and I guess went to a hotel room, I guess instructed by her or himself, and hid out. And they met up with him right after the Thanksgiving dinner and left town and went to go spend time with my sisters. My mother, my father, George, and they went to go see my sisters and their husbands. I still feel sick telling this story to this day. And I think it's because I don't really talk about this part of the story. But I think it's important to tell because I think a lot of us believe that a loss will bring the family together. And it is true. It either brings you completely together or it will rip you completely apart. And I hope that in listening to this story, it can inspire your family to come together and not be torn apart. And I remember feeling so disgusted by this. And I said, you mean to tell me that you lied that he had left and he actually stayed? And she said yes, that was the truth. And I said, I don't even understand how this all happened. And apparently they all rented a car together because they didn't have a car here because my mom, George, and my father had all flown in and my sisters had returned to their respective cities. So they rented a car together because my father is a foreigner. So they rented a car together, which my mother could have done on her own. She claims George did it and went down there. And the thought of this is disgusting to me because now it all made sense why on Thanksgiving evening she needed to get out of my place so that she could go and be with her boyfriend. And the anxiety went to about a 12 out of 10. And I remember thinking to myself, what has she told my father to make him believe that this man is a good man? And what did she tell him that I did? Because, wow. And I said that to her. And she said, I didn't say anything. I don't know what you're talking about. We just wanted to be together. And I knew you didn't want to be around him. And I was in shock. And I said to her, he's going to be at the hotel. And she goes, yes, that's why I'm telling you this. He's going to be at the hotel. He's with me. There was a lot of additional conversation. I was furious. I felt completely duped. I felt manipulated into being around someone who was abusive. And I threw out of my home for throwing things at her, throwing things in my home, verbally abusing her, verbally abused my sister as well, which I didn't really get into detail on because I want to respect her privacy in this situation. But it was horrible. It was horrible. And I can't believe that this was going on. And I sat on a couch. I laid on a couch by myself for a week. And it's not something I shared with really anybody except for the people that I've told you. I did end up telling Caleb closer to this, and I didn't understand how you could allow your child to be in that much pain because you wanted to be with this person that causes you pain. And I couldn't understand it. I still don't understand it to this day. I'm in a different state of emotion about it now, but it's hard to share it and difficult to share it because it's still painful. I think it'll always be painful because the loss is so painful. And so she asked me, with a $30 shirt to basically behave. Like I was a child, you need to behave. I need to behave. This is my brother that was killed in a homicide, murdered, and you want me to behave in front of your boyfriend. It blew my mind. And I remember just shutting up at that point and going, you know what? Okay. And as we drove the 2-3 miles down to the Wyndham in Peachtree City, I remember her kind of talking about their trip and how they had gone, from Savannah, and they had gone down to go see my sister in Jacksonville, and they saw my sister teach and, do all this stuff. And it was really, if you really just wanted to pull that dagger around, like, neither one of my parents had ever taken an interest in any of my work, anything I had done. I had been running major divisions for companies. I was now at, a director level. I was 30. I was doing a television show. I was doing all these different things. I had assets, investments. I owned real estate. And there was just no, interest whatsoever. In addition to the fact that she had her job because of me, and there was just no interest. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, I can't even go there right now. I just can't. And I said, I remember saying, that's nice. And we pulled up, and as we were pulling up, my astrologer called me. And I had been seeing him since I was 17 years old. My mother actually saw him when I was younger than that. And I would come through in the readings that she did with him. And then I eventually created a relationship with him. And I still see him to this day. So I'll be talking about him some more on here. I used to think it was total crap until he started calling things to the date. So that was a journey, and I'll be sharing that as well because it's applicable to this, and he does talk about my brother. He was so in tune with what was going on with me, he literally called as I was driving up, and we had gotten our dates flipped, but he knew, and I said, I need to call you back. Really wild. Can't wait to share more about that. And my mother told me your father's going to be waiting for you. My father was outside with one of his cigarettes, waiting outside the window. And she got out, and I'm sure, did her thing. And then my father was there and greeted me, and it was very awkward because I looked at him then and I knew he had been lied to. I knew it was total crap that he had been fed. And I didn't know. I don't know if you've been through this before, or if in the situation you're in right now, or if you're a surviving sibling and it was years ago, or maybe you're going through it right now again, You don't know who your allies are. You don't know, and again, I'm careful with this word, but it should not be that way. I do believe that the family should come together, and you're all on the same team. You are. You've all lost someone that you really love, and just because you're all mourning it really differently and going through it really differently doesn't mean that you're on different teams. And what she did was selfish. And I still feel the same way to this day. And so my father helped unload my bags and Scarlett, and I got, parked the car and settled into the room. And he asked me if I'd eaten, and of course eating, what's that? What's that when you lose someone, right? So him and I went to the lobby and had a bite by ourselves. And when we sat down, we each ordered a glass of wine and, started talking. And my father said, "You owe George an apology." I looked at him and I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he said, "You owe George an apology." I said, "I will not apologize to that man. I owe no one an apology." And he said, "What you did to him was terrible. It was wrong." He goes, "You threw him out on the street in the middle of the night," and he just started telling this entire narrative that was completely false, and everything just click, started to click. The manipulation and lies. I remember just sitting across from him and looking at him going, "That's what you think happened? That's what you think happened?" He goes, "Yeah, you threw his bag out into the middle of the corridor, the area," because I lived in a condo that was gated and had, multiple entrances. And I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm not going to deny that I threw his bag out with my mother standing next to me, throwing it out with me." And he looked at me and said, "What?" I said, "Do you want to know the real story?" And he goes, "I've just been traveling with him. He was an upstanding man. He paid for everything. He was great." He was he wouldn't let me pay for anything. It was confusing to me. I didn't understand, which my father does not need anyone to pay for anything for him. He's the one footing the bill typically for everything, which was, I knew then and there, again, was manipulation tactic number, I don't even know what at this point with these two. And I said, "Dad," I said, "when you're ready to hear the truth," I said, I'll tell you. And I remember him going, "Oh," he literally said, "Excuse my French, oh shit." And he looked me right in the eye. I said, "Yeah." He goes, he basically said I was duped. He said something a little different. My father speaks multiple languages, so he said something a little different. I said, "Yeah." And he finished his glass of wine real quick, got up and went outside and had a cigarette and came back to the table, and he goes, "Okay, what happened?" And I'll never forget feeling this sense of oh my God. I'm sure you've felt this before in your life, where no one had your back. No one believed you. Someone twisted something for their own gain. And then the person that you only really cared about, knowing the truth, finally realized that it was all untrue. And that was that moment. And so I got emotional. I got very emotional. I get emotional right now talking about it. Because I was like, I have to kind of like laugh to bring levity to it, because this is not a laughing matter, but it was that intense. And he realized that he had just spent a week with, I would venture to say, as much as a con artist. And I'm not speaking about my mother, I'm speaking about her boyfriend. I think my mother is someone who really just wants love. And I think she gets taken advantage of by people like this. And I'm sure she will not like me saying this, but I do love her and I do want the best for her. And this has happened in her life. And this man is not a good man. And so I proceeded to tell my father the whole story that I've already shared with all of you. And of course he's ordering more wine at this point because he's in shock. And he's like, I've been duped. I'm like, you have. I said, don't worry, I was too in the hospital by him. And then when I woke up, this is what was going on. And then I proceeded to tell him also, I said, look, I've received phone calls from her. This has been an ongoing thing. I just saw it for, in person for the first time. In addition to that, they weren't really a couple when they came here, and I found all of that out. He was really upset. He did apologize, which was a new thing for my dad, in my 20s when we had a meeting of the minds, a meeting of the hearts, a reconciliation. I think what's also challenging for probably my siblings and probably my sister specifically and my mother is that they probably believe that I'm glorifying my father too. The thing is, he's made a lot of mistakes too. And he has not been the father that maybe every person would want. But why I have the respect that I do for my father at this point in my life is because he took accountability for his actions. And that means a lot to me. And when people are honest and take accountability for their actions, I can deal with that. But when you are manipulative and you lie, I can't deal with that. I just have those kind of stipulations. And I think, it's okay. We're all different, but that's where I'm at. And it doesn't negate the fact that he wasn't around a lot of my life, but it doesn't make the fact that just because you were around in my life, it doesn't make it okay for you to manipulate and lie and continue to do bad things and create negative environments. And so, I hope that's helpful to you as a surviving sibling too, because I think it's okay to forgive and move on when people take accountability. People can wake up. People can wake up at 40, 50, 60, 70 and take accountability for their behavior, and it can be so healing for you. It has been for me. And I hope that is helpful for you to know. But it's also been a flip side to me where people in my life, and my mother has been one of them, I know that there was a lot of love there, and I do think that she was a good mother in a lot of ways, but at the same point, this type of situation that I'm telling you about right now that I went through when losing my brother and actively going through the process of the actual loss, and then the ceremony, we did a ceremony of life instead of a funeral, but it's a funeral. This was all about her and her boyfriend instead of my brother, and it was selfish. And so I'm not sitting here to tell you that I'm still angry about it, but I was angry as hell about it in the moment because there was manipulation and lies so that she could get what she wanted and have this really toxic person around our family who's not family. And I kind of felt a lot for my father in that way because I hadn't really been accepting of his partner, who he's been with for a very long time, and it's his wife. And we actually ended up having a lot of really wonderful talks after this talk, but I kind of sidebar that to say death will really bring out a lot of the truth, and I'm all about the truth. Even if it's really hard, even as I'm sitting here I'm not hysterical, in tears, so I'm able to share it, but this is a really raw part of the story that I've really not opened up to many people about, except for, of course, my closest of the close and my husband, my best friends, my husband. and it's a really hard part to talk about, and it hurts people to talk about. It does, I'm sure, but it doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from a place of truth and honesty. I was hurt. I should be, oh, here's that word, should. But we are able to tell our truth. And this was the truth. And I remember feeling such a sense of ease. And my father, the pain that I felt for him when he felt duped, he was just like, oh my God. There was almost like a sense of like, here we go again. Because he's been dealing with this, for, oh my God, 37 years with my mom, I mean, now to this day, I don't think they have contact now, but at the time it would have been 31, 32 years because I was 30 at the time. So I watched the betrayal wash over his face. I watched all of that. And I saw the regret that he had in the treatment. And it didn't take away the fact that I had been abandoned for a week, but I don't want them turned against each other or anything like that, but I couldn't, like, who does that? And I remember looking at him going, how am I supposed to? I said this to him as he got me my second glass of wine, saying, you probably need this. And I'm like, yeah, I probably do. And he said, he was still in shock. And I said, how am I supposed to chauffeur her around to her hair appointment, to all these appointments, and just not say anything? And he looked at me and he said, you're gonna have to. He goes, you're gonna have to be strong, you're gonna have to. And I said, but I'm disgusted. And he goes, I understand. And I said, you need to know I'm telling you the truth. This is the truth. And it was so sad that I felt like I had to say that over and over again. And he said, I know you are. He said, I know you are. And I'm really sorry. And he said, but I need you to do that tomorrow. And the big thing was, in those errands, the most important one, the only one that mattered, was getting my brother's ashes. And so I kind of just kept my eye on that. And that's how I got through that next day. And I did what my father asked of me. And I did. I took her to her appointment. I took her to, all these errands that needed to be run. And I didn't say anything. And when we got to the place, that was so sad. And it was very tough to be there, where we picked up his ashes, of course, the crematory. And there's a couple, urn options and things like that. I had already ordered the urn that I wanted for my brother. It's a green urn with a tree on the front because my brother loved trees, and I knew that. And my father had asked him at dinner, I said, do you want some of his ashes? Nobody else wanted his ashes. I was the only one. And my father said, yes, of course I do. I said, okay. I said, I will pick out an urn for you there, and I'll get you one. And he was very grateful. And so I was sending him pictures from there, and then he just said, I trust you, just pick out one. And I did. I picked out actually one that was similar to mine in size, but I picked out one that was blue like the ocean, because he told me he was going to put some of Andreas's ashes in the ocean off the beach that they spent time together on, which I thought was very sweet. And so that was, I felt like that was appropriate, and my dad did like it. But it was a hard day, having to sit there next to someone that had told such stories and had made this about something that, wasn't, but about her boyfriend, about just to get what she wanted. And I still, I guess to this day, don't understand it, but I am glad that I listened to my father's advice, and I'm glad that I stayed strong, because I was able to get him a beautiful urn and my brother's ashes, and he has a beautiful story now with that. And I have what I'll share with my brother's ashes, and it became more challenging as we approached, the ceremony the following day, but I did sleep a little bit that night, knowing that my father knew the truth, and there was a little bit of peace in me. Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.